Hi and good evening to everybody. Welcome to the final session of the French Film Festival that we have been having this month. And once again, I welcome Abhijeet Ranadive, the curator of this festival. Abhijeet teaches and writes about cinema, visual arts, media, and technology. His writings are published in mainstream Marathi newspapers and periodicals. He also works as creative head and member of the selection committee at the Pune International Film Festival. Thank you very much, Abhijeet, and welcome to this session. Over to you.
Thank you and welcome to everyone. Um, this film, I can say that compared to all the other films that we've seen so far, it differs considerably from the other films. So, a little bit about the background for this film. The director of this film, largely, I believe, he's from Mali, and he grew up in France, and not just in France, but he actually grew up in the suburbs where the action takes place of the film. So the kind of world that he's depicting here, it's very much his home ground, you can say. Moreover, the what you can call um, the film was inspired by something real that happened in 2005. Some of you might have heard about that because it made big headlines at that time. That there were riots in Paris. For a few days and especially nights, young people were out on the streets. They were burning cars and they were hitting the police, and all kinds of things were happening. Not many people died as such, but there was considerable violence. And with those riots, of course, they got a lot of international coverage also. But a few things came to the fore, and people started talking about a few issues. And the issues, as you can guess, were related to French identity and people who have migrated in France, or whose ancestors have migrated to France and who are living there. What is their reality? What kind of a future do they face? And how does France, the rest of France, look at them? And um, what are the problems, or what are the issues of faced by all these people? Um, and it's interesting to note also that the riots were caused by some event which was, in a way, somewhat similar to what we see here, in the sense that um, I think the police were looking for some kids for some crime or something that they had done. Not necessarily, I don't think it was a question of a lion cub being stolen from a circus or anything spectacular like that, but it was just something very ordinary that happens in these suburbs. And when the police tried to catch them, a few of the kids, in their attempt to run away, and with the police chasing them, so they tried to hide in an electric substation. And then the kids got electrocuted, and I think a couple of them died, and the third one survived, but he was heavily injured at that time. And no one really knows the circumstances under which this happened. Was it an accident? How much were the police responsible for that? And so on. So the film takes, I think, this fact, something that really happened, and it builds up into something um, like an action film. So if you look at the structure of the film as such, it is very much like the way the kind of things that you would expect in a Hollywood uh, action thriller, in the sense that the film starts with a bang, and then you are introduced to all the characters, and then some action happens, or the real cause for the conflict. We are introduced to that, and then there's this police playing cops and robbers kind of chasing and all that. And then, of course, something unexpected happens. And then from then onwards, the film, again, it does retain its structure of the action film, in the sense that even towards the end, when you think that it's all calmed down and the conflict is resolved and now there's no cause for worry, again something erupts, and something happens. So the film keeps, at least at first viewing, it keeps surprising the spectator with something unexpected happening, and also very colorful characters. And there is, you can say that, all kinds of almost masala things are there. Like, initially, it all sounds like a breezy comedy where, yeah, it's a rough neighborhood, but yeah, everybody knows everybody, and it's good fun, and there is a lot of understanding between the cops and the criminals and everybody else, and so on. So the film kind of lulls you into, uh, at least twice, once just before the chase sequence, and where the actual gun gets fired, and the second time, just before the end sequence. Um, and which is, I believe, which is very deliberate, because at least as far as France goes, um, it's very much the case that, as long as nothing is happening, France likes to lull itself into believing that all is well, and the citizens are all integrated the way the French state expects them to, and so on. And then suddenly something erupts, and then that balance, or that equilibrium, gives way to something totally different. I mean, just as a coincidence, I don't know if you have heard the news, but just a few hours ago, a cop was killed by somebody who was, I think, who's believed to be a Tunisian immigrant. He came to France in some 2009 or something as an illegal immigrant, and then in 2020 he became. I don't know if you have heard the news, but
Okay.
just a few hours ago, a cop was killed by. Hi, can someone mute? I think who's. I think there's an echo. Yeah, thanks. Um, so a cop was killed, and then, of course, the person who attacked, he was also killed by other cops, I believe. And I think the news, when I heard it last, was that he cried Allahu Akbar or Inshallah or some such thing while killing the cop. So these things keep happening, and every time, with regular intervals, you can say. And of course, all kinds of things, just like when we were discussing the film The Class. We discussed a bit about the secular state and what it tries to do with its citizens, and how it reflects among all the citizens, and how some people don't like it, or some people don't find it very easy to integrate. But what we see here is, I mean, what we had seen there was the classroom, and kids, and in a somewhat, we can say, mundane atmosphere, because finally it is the classroom with the teacher and the students, and of course something rough happens even there. But here we are very much on the streets, and with the police, and the kind of policemen that we see here. Um, so, given that, I would like to read a quote by the director himself, in terms of what he was trying to do when he made the film. So, he said that he wanted to make a film that doesn't take sides and that doesn't judge, and it only presents a situation as justly as possible. That's also what makes the film strong. It describes the reality. It was important for us to say that the miserables are everybody, the inhabitants, the police, all the people in this universe. Um, So in this sense, I found it very interesting that he tells the story despite being um, a black person, and despite being from that neighborhood. Instead of telling the story from the point of view of the residents of the neighborhood, he tells the story from the point of view of the cops. Because no matter what, the way we get introduced to the neighborhood and the cops themselves and all the other characters, it is through the cops doing the rounds and slowly coming to terms with what is happening and then trying to deal with the situation. um, and then even the cops, I think, so in terms of the construction of the film or the script, I would say that the film is very very just like I said earlier, just like a good Hollywood thriller. The film is very well crafted or even cleverly constructed, if you can call it that. In the sense that, so even among the three cops, you see that there is one guy who's, um, in a way, it is his point of view because it is him who's getting introduced to the neighborhood. And so he's a white guy, but he's an outsider in the sense that it is his first day in the neighborhood. He hasn't been working in Paris, so he's been working in the provinces. So he comes from a very different kind of understanding of what the situation would be or is going to be. And then his surprises are, in a way, um, our surprises also as the spectators. Um, uh, Whereas the other white cop is, of course, um, the guy who has a hot temper. So there is this difference between the two also, that one white cop who's very cold headed, and who always tries to do the right thing, and the other cop who's himself like a bit of a child. Because if you see the scene in the beginning at the police station, with all these pink pigs and people poking fun at him and so on, so he himself is a little childish. And even as the chief of the police there says that he sometimes blows his top, or he sometimes goes over the overboard and so on, and which we actually so we kind of are made to expect that it'll be him who will be responsible for something when it happens. And then it turns out that it's the third cop who's actually a black guy again. And again, interestingly enough, he's from the neighborhood, so he's grown up there. And in that respect, you can say that it's uh, his story can we don't know much about it, except when he sees his mother, we can make a few guesses. And the scene at the restaurant where he talks a bit about himself, so we can make a few guesses. But his story is a success story from the neighborhood, in the sense that somebody who grows up, who gets himself educated, who works very hard, because it's not easy to become a police like that. And then he gets assigned the same neighborhood, um, and then he's there again for a lot of the film. He's there, he's calm, he understands things from the inside because he's grown up there, much like the director, you can say. And yet there comes a point where he loses his balance. So I thought that even that part of the script was very interestingly done, that it's like it's a black cop against those kids from the same neighborhood. And it's he who does something which can get everybody into trouble. And then it's the two white cops who are actually trying to save his skin. um, and then of course, the very beginning of the film is also very telling, because you actually see Isa, whom we don't know at the beginning that the kind of role that he's going to play in the film. But we see him with the French tricolor. And of course, it's the World Cup final, and it's almost as if the whole of France is watching the final match. And then of course, it's also very symbolic, because you see him taking a train ride to go all the way to the Champs-Elysees, and then he's there right in the heart of Paris. and uh, if people don't know this, it's of course it's a very iconic place, the Champs-Elysees with the Arc of Triumph in front, because um, every time there are big celebrations, or even when there are victories in the war and so on, or even for example when Hitler's army went to Paris, they paraded through the Champs-Elysees, as if to tell the world that we are here and now Paris belongs to us. So in that sense, it's an extremely symbolic place for the French throughout their history. And also it's a very iconic or symbolic place vis-a-vis the World Cup also, because every time there is something as important as that, and once France makes it to the final league, and once those matches start, etc., um, there are actually the public does come out like that, and there are even big screens where you can watch the matches and then celebrate if France wins and so on. So people are very much there, and you see what you see there in the beginning is almost as if almost like a how do you call it, um, it's the illusion of a united France where people from all races and from all classes are there together, and they are they shout things like "Vive la France" and so on. But so it's interesting that the film starts with that, and it is real, because once something like that happens, and which we can imagine, even from our perspective, like when cricket matches are there, the whole country gets interested when it's the World Cup, or if India is playing the finals and things like that. So it is very much similar there, and it doesn't matter who you are. Everybody is they are betting on France, and they hope that France wins and so on. And so here actually it is the dream come true, because France actually wins, and then everybody's happy. And then starting from that high point, it is then that we turn to the next day, and which is a complete anticlimax. What happens the next day? It's also interesting how the drone is used, because in a way, so the kind of shots that we see from the drone, so those are the kind of shots that Parisians or French people in general are used to seeing, simply because many times, so the neighborhood is very infamous for these kinds of things, like riots and problems with the police and drugs and this and that, all kinds of criminal activities and so on. So the neighborhood is in the news, and the rest of France, you can say, it never goes there. It never gets. It always gets a bird's eye view of the events whenever something happens there, and that kind of a neighborhood is. Um, France talks about that neighborhood only when something like this happens. So it's almost as if saying that all you see is that neighborhood from up above, and now I'm going to show you the worm's eye view of the neighborhood. So he goes down and he shows you all these people. Um, Even the heat, I think, is very interesting, because the way somebody says in the beginning, I think it's the police chief, that it's 38 degrees outside, and so everybody is going to be on an edge, because it's the heat that kind of drives the people wild, and so on. And then you actually see that happening. So in a way, she's warning there, and what she says comes true, but I don't think anybody had expected it to reach that kind of a level. Um, and then, of course, the set of people whom we see there, that's also very colorfully drawn, and especially in the first whatever 35 to 40 minutes, while we are slowly getting introduced, in a way that is representative of these neighborhoods. So you see these Islamic brothers, or priests, or imams, or their henchmen, whatever you may like to call it. um, and you see how they are trying to radicalize the people or trying to get them into the mosque. And at the same time, these very kids who are going to be responsible for the violence in the streets later on, you see how bored these are with all that religious talk. And so you can make a few guesses there, such as, it's simply because they're getting free food or things like that, that they would, if at all they would go to the mosque, they would go for things like that. And yet at the same time, if you think about it, um, with the kind of events that you see happening, and with that the kind of hatred for the system and for the police, and therefore for the kind of France that makes them suffer, so the kind of hatred that builds up after these kinds of experiences, it is very probable that at least some of these children would get radicalized, and they would perhaps go to Syria, and become a part of the IS and things like that, and which you see a glimpse of that also. So while they are doing the tour of the streets, uh, I think one of the cops points at one person and says that he used to have this long beard and he had gone to Syria and he'd worked with the ISIS and so on. And then, of course, you see reformed criminals also, like the rapper who comes closer to the car, and you see his predicament also, that he's been to prison, he's come out, now he's trying to live a clean life, and it is going to be difficult. So he's going to find a job, he's going to try and find a job, but it's not easy for a person in his situation to get jobs easily. Um, so you see all these people, and then of course all the important people, like the mayor himself, and you realize that the mayor, he's instead of being on the sides of the kids or perhaps the people from his neighborhood. I mean, he is in some ways, or sometimes, or when he can, he is on their side. But you see how he plays with the cops. You see how he plays with everybody else in the neighborhood, and so on. So he is very much like local mafia, or whatever you might like to call it. And in a way, there are shades of the Godfather here also. And of course, in the persona of somebody like Sala, who is, again, when we are introduced to him, we think that he's just a funny guy. But then we also realize that he's also been a criminal before, and now he's reformed, and now he's become this sort of a guy who talks about Islam is peace and this and that and whatever. And yet again, at a very crucial juncture, it is through him that some kind of a peace is possible, or brokered in the neighborhood. Um, and then of course you see some of the kids, and the kids of course are made to be colorful, because obviously as a spectator we are um, expected to be empathetic to the kids, and so the kids are funny. And with this whole story about shooting with the drone and getting footage of the girls while they're alone, they're in their rooms and changing clothes and this and that, and then what happens afterwards. So you see the I say that the film is very well crafted or very well structured, because all these individual pieces, they are introduced to us in the first 40 minutes, and at that point we don't really know exactly how the whole thing is going to fit together. But then there is that scene of the high conflict, where the black cop has the kid Isa in his arms, and he's trying to run away, and then the kids are hassling him, and you realize that when largely says that he doesn't want to make judgments. So the whole conflict scene is handled extremely interestingly, in the sense that even on the football ground, when the cops try to catch the kids, um, his pepper spray or whatever it is, the kids actually are smarter than him, and they actually manage to spray that into his in his own eyes. And then he's already, agitated because of the irritation of the pepper spray and so on. So he is in a way already in a certain state of mind. And then the kid, of course, is very smart. It's not going to be very easy trying to catch him and keep him with them and so on. And again, you know how the kids play that game, that so they try to completely hassle him by throwing things at him, shouting all kinds of things and so on. So the whole chaos is created extremely deliberately as a sort of a reflex, or it is the kids survival strategy, because if you have to survive on the street like that, you have to learn these things and you have to know how to deal with the cops. So they play, in a way, they play their role perfectly well. So the only thing there that goes wrong is, of course, that the bullet goes off. And as we realize later on, it is not it hasn't gone off just like that, but it was so he's actually saw a shot deliberately, and he thought he was a good enough shot that uh, he would just scare him, but that is unfortunately that is not what happens. And so you see that the drone plays its role exactly there, precisely there, by and of course, so this is where I do say that it is very much like a Hollywood film, in the sense that is this very realistic? Everything coming together like that, with the drone, with the kids, with the lion cub, with this, with that, and with Isa being the kind of kid that he is, and so on. So everything coming together like that. So that is just you can say that it is a dramatic construct that is a bit artificial, and meant to put things in a certain way, just because that is extremely interesting, or that is extremely convenient, and so on. And then, of course, we cannot forget the gypsies. Um, again, I don't know how much of that, because there is, after all, a lot of dialogue, and even the scene with the gypsies and the mayor and their henchmen, each on their own side. So the scene is very fast. There are a lot of words, and so I don't know how easy it is to follow the dialogue and with the subtitles and so on. But so it is the gypsies, and that is also again very symbolic, because as some of you will definitely realize, and even we've seen the gypsies in the Agnes Varda film, for example, that so these are people who have been there like unwanted citizens, or citizens of nowhere, for hundreds of years. And again, so the system, or the state does not know how to deal with them, because they are, again, even before the immigrants came, and even before the immigrants became such a big problem or an issue for France to resolve, or troublesome, or the kind of troublemakers as some people would like to believe. So before that, it was the gypsies who were the troublemakers. And here, so we see these three elements coming together. So the gypsies are also very highly volatile, highly sentimental, highly emotional beings. And then you see the story with the circus and the lion and so on. Um so even that construction I found very interesting, that it's these gypsies, it's only those kinds of hot-tempered people who are full of life otherwise, and very interesting characters, although we don't get to see much of them. Uh, it's only those kinds of people who can tame lions, and they do. Uh, and therefore, in a way, it's a bit like saying that so the clues of taming these kids into something, or molding them into citizens, or giving them some kind of a future. So the gypsies' way of doing things is by putting them in a cage, and that is one side of the story. And I found the gypsies also very interesting from the construction point of view, because exactly when we thought that the conflict was resolved, um, and now things are going to get calm once again. So the problem comes if you realize, because of what happens inside that lion's cage, and which is that, Isa is made to go inside, and he's made to face the lion, and that is where he pisses in his pants. So you realize that it is the gypsy's way of handling things, and yet for somebody like Isa, it works in exactly the opposite way, because he's, in a way, he's the dada of his neighborhood among all those kids, and then in that moment, he's extremely it's a moment of extreme insult for him. So it's a moment of shame also, but it's also the insult that matters a lot more, and in a way that propels him to do what we see him doing at the end. And also I found it interesting that the end, and perhaps during the discussion we'll talk more about that, because I've run out of my time. But I like it that the end is kept deliberately open ended. So with this, I think I'll stop talking, and I would like to really hear now what other people have to say about the film.
Thank you, Abhijit, very much for opening out several strands of this very interesting and very beautifully made film. Anyone would like to raise a question or you have a comment, you may go ahead. Yes. Yeah, Nikhila?
Just to get the discussion going, I thought that this is a kind of present day version. Before I watched the film, I thought this is a kind of present day adaptation of Hugo. But I mean, the way in which the film kind of references Hugo, I thought was very, very interesting. I think in the end there is the short quote, and then we are told that the city has some connection with Hugo. So I thought the way in which this referencing happens is extremely interesting in the film. The second thing that I found again quite interesting is that uh, there is no black and white over here. That there are so many people who are implicated in the mess that gets created, including other black and other Muslim people. So it's like everyone is on this slide, and just losing control of the situation. I thought the way these dynamics play out in the film is extremely interesting. Thank you.
Yes, in a way, I would say nobody's innocent and everybody's miserable.
Anyone else?
Uh, can I
Yes.
come in?
Yeah, Jen.
Actually, I'd just like to first congratulate Abhijit for showing us such a wonderful film.
Thank you.
And it's one of the most powerful films that I've seen in a very, very long time. But then I'm left with a whole lot of questions which I will now pose in front of you, and we will together try to arrive at certain answers. First of all, um, are we agreed upon the fact that this is an adaptation or not? The very fact that it takes the name of Les Miserables, the only thing which is common with the original text and this film is that it much of it happens in that part of Paris which is Montfermeil or something, and then at the end there is this the line that there are no good herbs and uh, bad men, no bad herbs and bad men, only bad cultivators, that has come in the end. It is again showing that there is a certain way in which the administration, which the government has really failed the people. A very interesting article I read some time back, which says it's written by a Tunisian um, journalist about the situation in France today. He says that there is no post-colonialism in France. I mean, that's the title. And then he goes on to say that how, under the garb of cultivating, nurturing this kind of a multicultural society, the French government, the French administration, the French society is essentially elitist and including. I mean, he's a filmmaker. I mean, himself, this Laslie, the maker here, he's he says that French cinema, classic French cinema, mainstream French cinema is basically elitist, and therefore it is so boring, and I think he does everything in his power to make it not boring. Where do we go to find the answers to these questions? One is that, is it like the Tempest, Shakespeare, wherein Caliban, he says that you have given me language, and the only profit from it is that I have learned how to curse you with that.
Right.
So that sort of applies to Leslie here. I mean, it is very, very important to realize that there are almost 30 countries in, Southwest Africa, Northwest Africa, which are francophone. French
Right.
is a language which has
Right.
been taught to them by the masters. It is their language, but yet are they the same people? And therefore, if there is a kind of mismanagement, there is a kind of uh, misapprehension, misconcept in the minds of the elitist French government about these people who are immigrants, then we realize that it arises out of a certain incomprehension and the tendency to sort of lump all of them into, as a single homogeneous, entity. The fact is that they come from maybe 15 different nations in Africa, and there
Yes.
are Arab, people who are now French citizens, immigrants like Egyptians and Moroccans and a whole lot of other Algerians, particularly. But these people who are French speaking that we deal with this in this film are a separate. So therefore, they all have, I think, a special. Let us say, grouse against the government is that we speak the same language, but yet you don't understand us. You have given us this language, and yet you have not given us the right as an equal citizen. This anger is something which sort of bursts out under the slightest of provocation. We are made to think of Franz Fanon. I mean, is our understanding of the history of the migrant communities in France, is it heavily leaned towards the Western thought? Can we not understand them when they are talking about their own lives, about their own histories? This is what I think basically is what Lasby has tried to do in this film. But this objectivity, which I mean, one of these unifying factors supposedly is football, as he has started off with, but then he goes very early into the film to show us that this is sham. And Lasby himself says that, like religion, football is the modern opiate of the masses. For some time, it makes us, think wrongly of our homogeneity, but we realize that at least some of us, we are different. And mind you, almost 80% of the population of France lives in these communities, banlieues or whatever they are called, which are on the margins, on the periphery. And so, therefore, you can realize that the center, the elitist center, is so small, and someday it is going to erupt into a kind of a violent conflagration as it does here. But then is largely as objective about the situation. I mean, he has tried to be. He has tried to show good policemen, bad policemen. He has tried to show us um, good Muslims, bad Muslims. He has tried to show us, good kids, bad kids. But then the anger and the immensity of the violence which the small children are shown, even if it is directed against their own people. Some of those Molotov cocktails are thrown at, Salah's house, and particularly the mayor's house. That's another thing which sort of combines us with the original text of it. The mayor, although here he is totally different. Is there no guilt which comes upon those small children? That is one question which I'm asking from the point of view of the filmmaker. Yes, the state has gone wrong, but to what extent are the elders of their own community they themselves? How is it our sense of history has totally betrayed us that we can cultivate our anger, we can hold our anger, we can keep on shining our anger and allow it to come to the surface like this? Is there a lesson somewhere? I think it's a little hidden, and the fact that it is a kind of a history written by a French immigrant of his own community in the way that he best can. How is it? How reliable is it as history? That is my question. Contemporary history. So we need to go there. That I'm reminded of an essay by Dipesh Chakravarti. He talks about post-colonialism and the artifice of history, if I'm not mistaken. And there he says that now he quotes some other writer from this group known as the subaltern group, because this also is a kind of a subaltern history, wherein he says that at long last, Indian subaltern writers, historians have reappropriated the right to talk about their own history. And this is what he says, himself belonging to this group of subaltern historians. He finds it problematic as to there is no homogeneous, there is no universal subaltern in this country also. Language, economics, a whole lot of it. And the same applies, maybe much more so, in the case of these, uh, you know, um, these French people of African descent, that they are Arabs, they are Francophones, and they are from all different regions of this thing. To how much is their history the same history? Very ironically, the only thing which sort of unites them is the kind of oppressive nature of the state which has given them shelter. I'm reminded the 1980s or 90s, whatever, when there was a gentleman called Enoch Powell, a politician in Britain, and he was known for his anti-immigrant views. And there were a lot of steps taken by the government to sort of deal with what they thought was the immigrants problem. And there was this huge procession. There was this huge procession, tens and thousands of people on the streets, silent, and the only thing, they were not raising slogans, they were carrying placards which simply said, all of them, we are here because you were there. So I thought that if such a situation, can it explain everything, that we are here because you were there? This is the history of colonialism. And as I said in the very beginning, this Haytham Gizmi, or whatever his name is, I think he's a Libyan writer. He says that France has moved to neo-colonialism straight from colonialism. So there is this no intervening period of post-colonialism. Is this a correct um, given the fact that another thing, another person, another figure which sort of joins one of the films that we have recently seen, The kind of films which someone like Lasley would find very boring, I think things to come. I mean, this is what he means by mainstream elitist French cinema. And this one is the character of Nicolas Sarkozy. There is this old lady, the heroine's mother, who says that he's a very ugly man, that Sarkozy she talks about, and that he's a crook. And here also, we know that after the 2005 riots, it was Sarkozy who was the Minister for the Interior at that time. He called all these rioters as the French word, I think it means rascals. So his total inability to understand a point of view which is not the mainstream, the classical view, French view of thinking. So we have all these expressions, all these questions. And I would probably want first to think that to what extent is this an adaptation? Is it adaptation? Normally, when we talk about adaptation in cinema, unfortunately, what we are looking for all the time is a one-to-one correspondence. That this happens in the book, but it doesn't happen in the. But that's not the way things usually happen. But then, too, there has to be something other than the fact that everyone is probably miserable. Um, in this world which is the picture of misery, but there is always an assumption that in that 20% of Paris which is not inhabited by people like these, they must not be miserable. So is that fact established? And if it is established well enough, is that the only thing which joins Victor Hugo's novel to this film 200 years later, I don't know, 150 years later, and written uh, with an entirely different, from an entirely different perspective. And there was a book which came out, that the Empire Strikes Back by Bill Ashcroft and Helen Tiffin and all these people. So there is a compilation of post-colonial writing, and this is probably the filmic version of the Empire Writes Back. But how objective is this margin vis-a-vis the center? That is the question that I would like to ask. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That was very interesting what you said. So let me start with colonialism in the first place. Um, I have to say, I mean, I don't know how many of you know how France regards its colonies or regarded its colonies. I think when we talked about Entre Mur, we might have discussed some of that. But for example, the French were possessive of their colonies uh, in a way which was very different from the way the British were, for example. Um, I mean, I find it, very odd or a very telling difference that as soon as the British gave us independence, it was almost as if, for them it was the story was over, and then they just went home. It's almost as if after that they didn't really want to have anything to do with us in a way. And I'm not blaming them, or I'm not saying that they did something wrong by doing that. But you realize if you go to the French colonies that the number of French people that are still there, or that have, the number of white French people that is, who stay in these countries, it's a surprisingly large number. And they are involved everywhere. There is industry, there is economy, anything with money or culture in it, and you'll find the French there. So it's almost as if, even today, if you go to, say, Morocco, or say Algeria, or say one of these countries, Tunisia for that matter. So the moment you start going into their elitist circles, you start seeing the French connections, and you start seeing the white people there. um, so in that sense, the way it's almost as if the French still regard that as a part of their empire or something. I mean, it's very hard for us sitting in India to imagine the kind of things that happen there. But for example, I'll just give you a very telling incident. A few months ago, you might have seen in the news that there was an explosion in Beirut, and Lebanon as a country has been going through a lot of turmoil. There are economic problems. The government is not stable. There is a lot of inflation. People are, even basic groceries are not available in the shops and so on. So all kinds of problems there. And then it was almost as if the explosion was. It made things even worse. And then, almost immediately, just a few days after the explosion, in the midst of a pandemic, you actually have Emmanuel Macron going to Beirut and mingling with the people on the streets. So it's like, so he's not just going there and meeting the statesmen and the diplomats and so on. He's actually there on the streets of Beirut and talking to the people over there. uh, and he's saying that France will give you financial aid and so on. And giving financial aid is not a problem, but then he says that uh, essentially he put conditions to the government, saying that the government has been unstable for such a long time and so on. So you got to get your act together, and only then I'll give you money and things like that. So it's almost as if it is still the colonial times, because can you imagine Boris Johnson in the streets of, say, Delhi, if there is some kind of a natural or man-made disaster, and if there's an accident and people are killed and so on? Can you actually imagine that? I mean, just try to see how Indians would perceive that, and then try to imagine the situation in Beirut. So when I saw the visuals, it's like one more time when France shows up, or if you've seen the history of Rwanda and the genocide there, and now I mean, it's been unleashed for quite some time, and now even there's more evidence that points to the role of French people in the whole genocide and so on. So, in this sense, yes, the I mean, the situation or the relations between France and its colonies is completely different from the situation of, say, British colonies. The second point that you raised was about elitism, and it's also, again, I would point to something that happened very recently, or it's, in fact, it hasn't yet happened. It's about to happen. Um, so a lot of the France's elite, in terms of their civil servants, their politicians, most of their presidents, many of their ministers, prime ministers, and so on, they come from a very small bunch of very elitist schools. And one of the main ones among them is what is known as the INA, which is the National Institute of Administration. So it is, it's an administrative school, and it creates administrators. It's a very elitist school, and if you look at getting in is of course very tough. Um, and if you look at the students demographics there, you'll realize that compared to France's demographics, it is completely skewed. So it is mostly made up of, the students are mostly made up of people who have come from, again, France's elitist families. So I'm not saying, it's not that they are mostly white, is that even amongst the white, it's a very, 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 what I would call, Brahminical class there, very elitist, coming from very elite families, which comprise of most of their students. And so this thing was, people have been crying hoarse about this for quite some time now. So now I think Macron's government has decided that they want to dismantle that. They want to start a new school, or I mean, they will. I guess they'll change the name. They'll do some cosmetic things, but what they want to do is, they want the new school to be more inclusive. And so, when we hear things like that, of course there are parallels to India. I'm not saying that there aren't, but the fact remains that these kinds of problems exist. And so if you have these kinds of very elitist, top, I don't know, 0.001% of France deciding policies and deciding what goes on and so on, of course it makes a difference. And I mean, of course, in terms of the ministers, or in terms of civil service, and in terms of many other things, they try to be inclusive. And we've talked about some of the educational policies and so on also, when we discussed on Lemure. Except that the ground reality is very much like this. And therefore, is there room for improvement? Yes, there is room for improvement, very much so. And today's France, even today, it is very skewed, and in terms of, who has power and who doesn't have. So, coming to your, I think, Hugo question, I don't see the film as really an adaptation, but I would say the film is what I would call a very Victor Hugoesque film, in the sense that, this whole, the whole structure even of the film is very Hugoesque. In that there are some very exciting things happening. There is a considerable amount of violence, very interesting characters, very colorful characters, very emotional scenes, and something that keeps the spectator completely spellbound all throughout. And you know um, uh, in regular intervals something exciting keeps happening, and you're never bored. So the whole structure and the whole complexities of the film, and the way it triggers emotions in the spectator, I think it is, I mean, I can't call it anything except very US. So in that sense, I don't regard that as an adaptation really, but it's almost as if, you've internalized Hugo style, and you've made a film out of that.
Thank you, Abhijit, for that response.
I'll come back for a minute,
Yes,
Yeah, sure.
Geeta.
yes,
Abhijit, thank you for so beautifully summing up the whole thing and answering all my questions. I just want to add something more. Uh, I mean, Laszlo himself says somewhere that yes, all that is there, but this is not yet Uhuru. Now Uhuru is a reference to obviously, Amos Césaire's Un Tempête, which is a kind of a negritude version of the Shakespeare's Tempest, wherein the corresponding character for the slave Caliban, he says that his own purpose in life is uhuru, revenge and freedom in Swahili, or some, I think, some African language. It is the equivalent of freedom. I will draw your attention back to the end of the film. In Marxist terms, has the revolution arrived? Or that things will go back to normal after this particular bout of the riots end? That is my
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Thanks.
So if you see the recent history of France, and I mean, if I were to, of course, things were simmering from even before that because of all the things that France has been doing to its colonies and so on. But I believe, so one turning point in the whole of Western Europe in general was Satanic Verses in 1989. So when Khomeini issued the fatwa, I believe even in France, that is in Paris, I think there was a mob of maybe 1,000 or 1,500 odd people who had marched in the streets of Paris. Um, I think shouting slogans like "Death to Rushdie" or things like that. I don't exactly remember, but and then uh, I think there were riots in 93 or 95. I forget which one, but 93, 94, I think. Then in 95, there was a film which is again, it is considered very much a cult film and an iconic film. And people should, if they haven't, they should watch it. It's called La Haine, or Hate. And Les Miserables is very much influenced by that, because even there, you see the structure, of course, is very different. But again, it is based on, or it is inspired by real events in these banlieues. And again, it's a violent story. It takes place in these banlieues, and you actually see police and the rioters and these immigrant families and so on, with the big exception that Uh, the film is made by a white guy. um, it features, in fact, the three the point of view is from the people who are living in the banlieue. But again, there are large differences, but still, I would say that it's a film that's a must watch for anyone who's interested in contemporary French history. And then, of course, with 9/11, with the 2005 riots, with the radicalization of youth, and again, in more recent past, the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, and the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and the other attacks, and just the incident that I talked about just now, which happened not less than 24 hours ago. So these things keep happening. So it's almost as if, contemporary France itself has become Hugoesque, in which something erupts, then there's an illusion of calm for some time, and then again something erupts, and it's almost as if, there is no way out, because nobody has a solution. I mean, Macro, for example, he's been um, it's very interesting to see him trying to strike a balance, because the threat to him politically, the political threat to him, is an extremely right wing party, which is called the Front National, or the National Front. And they have, if you see their history, the person who started it, Jean-Marie Le Pen, so he was very much a racist and a fascist, if I may say so. Um, so the party has been fascist and has been racist. Now it's run by his daughter, Jean-Marie Le Pen. She has modernized the party to such an extent that um, there are times when some of the centrist or more liberal parties like Macron's um, and Jean-Marie Le Pen's party, the National Front, uh, the differences between them are very few. And so, Macron has an existential problem, or other parties or other politicians like him, wherein, if they are seen to go uh, too liberal towards the migrants, and enacting policies in their favor, or that makes life easier for them, then the fear, always the fear, is that um, the so-called average white voter would turn to the right, and which will make matters worse. And so they cannot veer too much towards the uh, left, as you may want to call it. And at the same time, we have to realize that, even if you look at the liberal left, or the socialists, or I mean, the whole political spectrum, for example, um, because of a unique history of France, because of the way things happened. I mean, if you have to go back, I'll go back to all the way to Molière and Voltaire. If you look at the history of the kind of troubles that they had with the clergy and the censorship and so on. I mean, Voltaire, for example, was exiled for much of his life. Molière wasn't, but still, every time Molière, for example, if you go to the history of what happened with Tartuffe or Don Juan, his plays, so he got into trouble with the clergy because he did write plays that criticized the religion and the problems with the religion as he saw them. The same is with Voltaire. Then again, after the revolution, slowly, what they call laïcité and what we call secularism, although our concept of secularism is very different from the French concept of laïcité. And I think, uh, if I remember correctly, we had talked about all those burqa laws, and laws about not wearing any conspicuous religious symbols inside schools, and inside government places and so on. So all these laws, and of course, if you look at the history of the Charlie Hebdo itself, um, so it was fiercely anti-establishment from the beginning, from its inception. Um, and again, if you look at 1968 and the slogans such as "Il est interdit d'interdire," which means it is forbidden to or banning should be banned. I don't know how to put it in English, but so to put a ban on something, that act itself should be banned. Those were the kind of slogans that the 68 the Swazantvitars, as they're called, they had. And so what happens is that when the issue is something like the publication of the Prophet Muhammad cartoons, or the killing of somebody like Samuel Paty last year, who was trying to teach kids in his class about freedom of expression. So when something like that happens, the majority of France is in favor of freedom of expression. And so even when we talk about the left in France, or even when we talk about the liberals in France and so on, so there is this big debate happening today about, is our version of the republic really the ideal one, or does it need to change? And these questions have started to be asked simply because of these kinds of incidents, whether it be the terrorist attacks, whether it be the riots, or the kind of things that we see in films like Hate, or films like Miserables, and then of course things like the killing of Samuel Paty. So the question of what constitutes French identity, and how can it we make more inclusive, how can we make the immigrant community or the Muslim community uh, um more like they are part of France, and that France cares for them, and France wants them to do better, and the state will help them in doing that and in integrating that. So all these questions have come to the fore because of all these things. Are there answers? I don't know. Like I said, the moment the centrists start moving a little bit towards the left, or a little bit towards being more liberal, or being more tolerant, or being more inclusive, the right wing parties start becoming more popular. Um, and which people don't want to happen. Even the liberals won't want that to happen. um, I would also mention, while passing here, a novel by Michel Houellebecq called Submission. I don't know if some of you have read that in either in French or in English, but it talks about it's what I would call a dystopian novel, in which the dystopia happens because um, of these kinds of problems. There is an Islamist party which is also fighting elections, and the mandate is divided such that the Socialist Party uh, has an agreement, or it has a coalition with the Islamist Party, with the end result that the president of the republic becomes a Muslim person. And it's a very interesting novel, so I won't say much about it. But by creating such a fantastic scenario, actually, so Welbeck met with a lot of criticism. And in fact, some of you might know this, that when the Charlie Hebdo attack happened, actually the issue of Charlie Hebdo that was on the in the kiosks and to be sold was an issue with Michel Houellebecq on its front page, and the submission, the novel, was actually about to be published. So that was the timing of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And so there is a lot of debate in France. Uh, I don't think anybody has clear answers right now, but everybody agrees that there is a problem. Let me just put it this way. And again, I don't know if I've answered your question, because I mean, I don't think I have, simply because uh, nobody seems to have answers right now, honestly.
Thank you, Abhijit. Would anyone else like to come in with a comment or question? Yeah, Jayant, please go
No, I
ahead.
just like to thank Abhijit. He has really answered my questions.
Okay. Any more questions, comments? I think the resistance also to the state power as represented by those three cops is not something that just comes up towards the end, but in a way it is there, building up right from the beginning. Even in the very early scene, in one of the very early scenes, there is a little kid who, very fearlessly uses the F word for the cop. So, it's almost as if on a day to day basis, these children, from that kind of a neighborhood have to confront state power, and that is all, part of their day. And slowly it kind of builds up towards the end where, you have that scene, very telling scene of Isa holding that lit up torch, and the cop whose nickname is Greaser, poised with a gun. So, so that kind of resistance is something that is ongoing for them.
Yes, in fact, you can also see this film as a sort of a complementary piece to Entre les Murs, because for someone like Suleiman in Entre les Murs, his insolence and even the insolence of some of the other kids. So when you actually see the street life here in Les Miserables, you kind of understand where their insolence in the classroom comes from. You know.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yes,
Um,
yeah, Ananta, please go ahead.
Hi. I actually enjoyed the film quite a bit. I'd have to agree with Abhijit that it's sort of, you know, structured like a Hollywood thriller, a cop procedural, if you can call it that. Um, you know, uh, but it sort of takes its own sweet time to set up all the pieces. It's almost as if the director is taunting the viewers, saying that, hey, listen, now all the set pieces are now in place, and now what's going on through your head, you think it is going to go where you think it is going to go. So it's almost very tauntingly that he's taken his own sweet time establishing, but what we see really is we see the entire film through the vantage point of Ruiz, the new cop who's in town, and we're looking at this sort of highly dysfunctional society. I have to apologize. I have not read Les Miserables, and nor do I have that much of knowledge about the French history, or even how it is right now. Um, but we're seeing this very, sort of dysfunctional society, and what you're also seeing is in the table setting how all the, I mean, what the different power dynamics are. Who is the powerful, who is speaking to whom. And so for me, from that point of view, the drone was sort of a very interesting choice, because you're looking at the kids, and the drone shot is essentially saying, like, let's try and rip this out of these power dynamics. The kids, the drone shots are saying that I want to remove you for once, from these power dynamics that the film is trying to set up. The Muslim Brotherhood, the mayor, etc. And also kids usually, their eye line is always almost low. They are looking up to elders, and here you have these kids who are having a completely different point of view. So I found that to be quite interesting. And so from that point of view, taking through the kids, is that it's a complete rejection of authority. It doesn't matter who you are. It could be somebody from your own team, or maybe you share a skin color, maybe you share an ethnicity, but overall it's a total rejection of authority. It's a rejection of the state, because the Ruiz, the new cop, is almost, he's new to the setup. He's having that empathetic view, and I found that conversation between the black cop and Ruiz very interesting, because Ruiz is coming and he has a new point of view. He's almost reformist, and this guy is saying you have absolutely no idea how we live. And then the kids reject all of them put together. So it's a total flipping of the situation. And I was half um, not convinced with the ending, with how it escalated. But I don't think it was really that big of a pain point, because for me, the way that I saw the ending was actually that if you look at Ruiz, and he's the character who we follow all the way through. He's here. He has a sort of, if you can call it that, a reformist point of view, or is an empathetic point of view, etc. And he's entering this dysfunctional society, and it eats him up. That's what it eventually comes down to. He's had to eventually draw the gun on this setup that he thinks is not right. So I still have not made up my mind on whether it escalated too quickly, because it had a very languid pace, and then all of a sudden it just sort of shoots up. So yeah.
Thanks. With respect to what you said about the drone, I would also like to point out one incident that happens before that, which is at the bus stop. You realize that the cop is actually manhandling that girl, and so the other girl starts actually shooting it with her mobile, and then the cop realizes that and he destroys the mobile. So it's almost like he's putting those pieces in place to tell you that. Uh, the same thing is going to repeat later on. So in that sense also, it's a very novelistic way of doing things. um, and also, it's a way, the whole drone thing, the way it plays out is, it's almost like saying that um, the cops, and with the streets have their surveillance cameras and cctvs and this and that, and you see, even in our case, be it the Sachin Vaze case or something else, every time now it's almost as if anything that happens in the streets, there are surveillance cameras that are recording that, and all kinds of things in terms of criminal, when there is a criminal investigation, all kinds of things turn up thanks to those surveillance cameras. So here, with the drone, they're saying that if the state thinks that it can do things to us by putting all these surveillance cameras and by using them against us, then even now we are we are in a situation where even we can have those drones, and we can uh, try to teach you a lesson. So don't think of us as some powerless human beings that are at the mercy of the state and the policemen and so on. So I found that piece interesting from that perspective also. And then, of course, the third thing in which this whole imagery and the way we look at imagery comes to the fore is, that is how even Isa is discovered, that he's just like the cop says, sooner or later they won't be able to hold it back, and you will find something on social media. And it does happen that he wants to have a photo of himself with the cub, and then that comes out on Instagram somewhere, and that is how the cops realize that it is Isa who has the cub. So the way the whole thing is structured in terms of who is in power, who is looking at what, and who, by virtue of being seen, is getting caught. So that the film has multiple layers of these issues there.
Any other comments, questions? Rajan, Takeshwar, Varnavel, Sanjay.
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, could I ask a question?
Please,
Yeah,
please.
go ahead.
Yeah, I found this very interesting that the gypsy wagon has Zeffirelli on it, right? So I thought that was very interesting. But all that thing that happens in the cage, it that was really something uh, very shaking, right? Because just in case there's a mistake, right? And the thriller element over there, definitely. Also, when this boy runs on the rooftop, right? The guy with the drone,
Buzz.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So when he runs on the rooftop, again you have that a kind of fear that he might just jump off the roof or something like that, and then there'll be some further complication. But that is a moment of real terror. And then it's yeah, and you had spoken about Hugo and Victor Hugo and his novels, right? So when you look at the Hunchback, right? You get this gypsy girl, right? So the gypsies are very, very prominent, and they're still treated badly all over the world. So I think, and initially the first part of the movie, this cop in charge, the way he speaks about them, oh, we've got the gypsies, we've got trouble here, right? It's almost a neo-Nazi kind of approach to the black people and the gypsies. So the question is the triangle between the state, the black people, and the gypsies. I think that was also very interesting for me. Uh, yeah, and yeah, they show them going back to their homes, right? So all the three cops go back to their homes and they have a kind of a normal life. And I don't know what kind of a normal life is that, because they see both sides of the. It's just like the drone business, right? The surveillance this side, the surveillance that side, right? And then they see all the the ghetto actually is the ghetto and the normal kind of life that they have. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was hoping that somebody would mention the cops' families there.
Yeah.
It's so again, it's a very interesting way of, in a way, largely humanizing the cops, because you see, uh, you know. That whole logic there, I quite enjoyed that logic, in the sense that so they've dealt with these kids their whole day, and how dangerous the situation is, and they've seen the way these kids live and all kinds of things that happen, and with the injured kid with the bullet, and you see how Ruiz runs to the pharmacy as soon as he can, and gets that kid something and so on. And then the moment he comes home and he has a moment of respite, he calls up his kid. So it's a very, I would say, it's a very touching way of portraying that cop. And also, I think even the other white cop, the way they show him almost being bullied by his kids. So it's a bit of, again, by doing something like that, I think he's kind of hypnotizing you into believing that, okay, things have calmed down now, things have calmed down, things have calmed down, and now I'm going to explode. So it's, in a way, he goes back to that slightly funny parts in the beginning, where the spectator is expected to sit back and enjoy with these, while these cops are giving the new cop, the rookie, run of the neighborhood and so on. So it's a bit like that. And yet, you see, again, when you see this black cop with his mother, it's again, I think, a very interesting scene, because he's been, after all, in the center of things by the fact that it was, his bullet that injured the kid, and he has been extremely tense throughout the, as soon as that happens, um, he has been in that mood where, in the first place, he's extremely tense, but also you have to realize that if actually that thing comes out, in the open, then he will lose his job, because a cop, if he's actually found to be shooting kids like that, he can't remain in his job anymore. So he has been extremely tense, extremely afraid also, and yet he's relieved that finally that incident is over. The kid is not dead. The line is returned, and he's not going to lose his job. So what he does is he's actually come back to his mother, and he actually cries on her shoulder, so to say. So again, that that scene, it humanizes the cops, and yet it does not uh, make them innocent. So I found the whole structure of that situation quite interesting. And again, like you said, with the gypsy scene, um, it is what I would call, it's a part of whether it's the kid Isa with the gypsy inside the cage scene, or whether it's the other kid Buzz running away from the cops scene. So those are, what the kind of things that make me call the film a very Hollywoodian kind of film, in which is it realistic? Not quite, but at the same time, it's the kind of those are the kind of scenes that make that film exciting. And also, the kind of low point that you can reach by having that kid inside the cage, and by having him piss in his pants. That kind of low point is dramatically necessary to reach the end that largely wants to reach, I think.
Yes, Varnavil, you would like to.
Yes, no, thank you, Abhijeet, for not only the film but also wonderfully setting it up, and also for the discussion. To Jayant and Rajan, everybody here. I also agree, that this is more like a subaltern take, on Victor Hugo. But what I think is the most challenging, thing about this film is the screenplay is, very intricate. It's very dense. It doesn't take the easy option of, um, the earlier rendering of Hugo, where the binaries will be very clear and it will be, a very nice melodrama. But here it is, as you pointed out through the black cop, that it's complicating, those kind of binaries at all levels. And that's what makes it very humane. And in a way, what you constantly allude to about the relative realism, within this fictional world. And definitely, it borrows that element from Hollywood, but it also extends it beyond, by this kind of characterization, who are very porous. They move this side and that side of the border, within that community. And I also liked, the discussion surrounding the drone, because the very material and aesthetics of the drone, from a top-down view, itself, that it indicates, certain kind of an authority, that with all this, with digital capitalism, with what is happening, and so that is also used, very well in this film. It's not just for, some nice transitions that they generally do in this Netflix genre. Here it becomes, part of the
Right.
storytelling, part of the storytelling. So thank you, Abhijeet, because I think it was an extensive discussion, and you also explained in detail, the backdrop. And thank you. Thanks for the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, in terms of the craft, I think what you said is quite correct. And I mean, honestly, a lot of the Indian cinema that when I see it, I find that although I might agree or disagree with the points of view. I have a feeling that perhaps some of the Indian filmmakers who want to say something serious, make a serious point, and yet want to create an entertaining film, not one of those supposedly boring, arty or elitist kind of films. So they, I think they have. They should really study the craft of films like these in order to improve Indian cinema. If something like that happens, I would be very happy, in fact.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I
in
feel that.
some ways, I'm reminded of the film Kala. I don't know if you've seen it,
Yes.
Rajnikant. So
Yes.
so the kind of subaltern takes that you have there, and with Dharavi as the backdrop, so you will see that there are certain parallels here.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Any more questions, comments? Yeah, Tarkeshwar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Abhijit, for asking us to look at this movie and also for the elaborate discussion on it. As you and several others, including Swarnavel, pointed out that uh, the plot is very complex here. So there is no easy black and white thread that is running through. So, as Swarnavel was saying, it's a porous border. So, a black is also on this side, and some of the leaders of that black community are also hand in glove with the police. So, in that sense, it very thick. The plot is very thick. Uh, so, in that sense, it escapes easy theorization about state versus the subaltern or the colony versus the mainland or the suburb versus the main city, things like that. So the reference to Victor Hugo's novel is more a intertextual rather than a relationship is not of adaptation, but there's a reference to it, and that reference works. How it works for me is here the characters are growing. There is no a character which is typecast. So there is a movement within the character, and this new cop who is who want to go by the rules, not to attack the kids, is the one who is holding the gun at the end. So there's a
Right.
complete transformation. So that is a dramatic uh, change in the plot. So and the Chris, the white cop, who was aggressive in the beginning, is now subdued at the end. So he has been shown his place, and the even the mayor is attacked. Even the other guy is attacked, and the children are also not listening to the uh, brotherhood group, which try to bring them to the mosque. So they are into football. They are into other things. There's a new subculture which is coming up. So it has not actually nothing to do with Islamic, but the tag of Islamism is on them. So in that sense, it's a very complex thing. Everyone is undergoing a transformation in that. So the context forces them to take up certain positions at certain point of time. But actually, they may not believe in it. So there's a transformation when the cop go home, they're a different thing altogether. So the situation and the context are making them to behave in a particular way. So in that sense, it's again, yeah, as you said, Victor Hugo's how the context shape our deeds, kind of things. So it's an very interesting uh, film, and I really enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much for suggesting it.
Thanks. So if you look at it from the kids' point of view, um, in a way, the entire establishment has failed them. So when we say somebody like Salah or the Islamists, like you said, um, as well as the mayor, So these are the people who should have been fighting for them, um, and these people actually end up collaborating with the policemen eventually by destroying the evidence against the cop. And then the cop against whom this evidence is also black. These are the kind of things which in a way make the kids think that um, there is nobody to defend them, and so it is up to them to uh, defend themselves and defend their honor, because that is how the scene with the inside the cage works, that Isa is dishonored, and in a way then he becomes like the classical hero, even in a classical French play where a lot of talk about honor and dishonor is there, and a lot of things happen simply because somebody is dishonored. So in a way it's a very Corneille or that kind of situation. So I found that piece also interesting because of that. But yes, thanks.
I think there's also another intertextual connection to the 2005 riots. So this is happening in 2019.
Right.
Already 2005 is gone, and within the narrative there is a reference to it, especially when he has to get back that uh, evidence from that Sala. It threatens him actually. Though he's trying to convince him, he says, "You know what happened in 2005? So you people attacked, and then there was a backlash on you." And all these people, elders, they're not simply collaborators. They're also trying to avoid the 2005.
Right.
Though that the irony is that though they're trying to avoid 2005, it happens at the end.
Yes.
The youngsters are actually revolting, in spite of the elders trying to avert it by being what we call as collaborators, are buying the peace by giving that evidence. So that is the irony that comes out in this narrative, I think. So in
Right.
that sense, it is also a take on 2005 and the post 2005.
Any other questions, comments? Sanjay, would you like to say something?
No, I don't have anything much to say, except that, like in the beginning, we see Isa going with the French flag, and that and also singing of national anthem. This national anthem itself has become a symbol of naked violence and masculinist aggression. If you look
Yes.
at the wordings of the
Yes.
national anthem, and it chooses to, I mean, when we hear this national anthem, it is the second paragraph of the national anthem, not the first, the way it starts. So that kind of aggression is there already. When they are celebrating, we can see that violence,
Yes.
uh, that something is going to come up, like the singing of national anthem, and the celebration itself is very wild in the sense. uh, and then what comes after that is also interesting, that this boy who is using this drone to, that the drone is there at the window of a girl. This kind of behavior, the police man is also doing the same thing. I mean, this the kind of sexual harassment, and Chris is also doing the same thing, that what the kid is doing. It's
Yes.
like there is a kind of parallel. And he says at one place that I am the law. He says, loi c'est moi, that I am the law. So he knows that here whatever he says in this locality will be taken as a word of law. He represents the state. Actually, like that reminded something of Louis XVI saying "L'état c'est moi,"
Right.
that the state, I am the state. So he
I
says,
knew
I
where
am the
you were
law.
going. Quite so.
But finally he gets his due by the end of the film, and is hurt there. So that, I mean, good. So thank you very much for choosing this
Thanks.
film and discussing it.
Thanks. Yeah, so that is why, right from the beginning, I say that it's very clear that the film is trying to say that we have to go back to the foundations of the republic, and what were the values on which the republic was founded. And of course, we cannot forget the violence with which the republic was founded. And therefore, it is trying to go to the core of what constitutes French identity itself.
Okay. Any more responses to the film? Comments? Okay. In that case, we'll bring this session to a close, and this um, is also the end of the French Film Festival that we have been having for the past 4 weeks. Thank you very much. A really very big thank you from all of us to Abhijeet for the wonderful sessions that he has conducted for us and all beautiful films that you introduced us to. We are really grateful to you, Abhijeet, and I do hope you, on behalf of all of us, I do hope you continue to come to our sessions as and when time permits. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you very
Thank
much.
you,
Abhijit,
Abhijit.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
for
you.
all
much.
the films.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You
Thank you.
And for
you've
the
been a wonderful
discussion.
audience, and I've enjoyed the discussion. So it would be my pleasure to come again if we are interested, and so on. So no problems about that at all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very
Thank
Thank
you.
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Good
Bye.
night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.